They told you awakening would feel like bliss, like peace, like clarity. But instead, you're shaking, you're unraveling, you're seeing through everything. And no one warned you what that would feel like. You're not crazy, you're awakening. And the truth is, no one tells you how hard it is to break the spell. But once you see the hidden architecture of who you were, you begin to meet who you truly are. They told you awakening would feel like bliss, that once you raised your vibration, everything would fall into place, that you'd feel calm, peaceful, in control. But they never told you about the breakdown before the breakthrough. They never mentioned the nights where you'd lie in bed and wonder who the hell you even are anymore, or why things that once brought you joy now feel hollow, or why the people closest to you suddenly feel like strangers. Because what we've been sold is a false awakening, a commercialized version of spirituality wrapped in white light and affirmations. And none of it prepares you for what it actually feels like when your soul begins to wake up. Because real awakening doesn't start with light, it starts with fire, a burning away of everything that is not you. The illusion doesn't dissolve gently, it shatters. And in that shattering, there's grief, there's fear, there's isolation. You begin to question everything, not just the world around you, but your beliefs, your identity, your very sense of self. And that's where the real journey begins. Because awakening isn't about escaping your pain. It's about meeting it face to face, holding it in your hands, letting it speak, and realizing that everything you've suppressed, every emotion, every wound, every shadow, was never meant to be denied. It was meant to be seen. But no one told you that. No one told you that becoming conscious might feel like going crazy at first, that your old life would begin to fall apart, not because you're failing, but because the foundation it was built on was never real. They told you to chase the light, but they forgot to mention the dark, the sacred dark, where the real alchemy happens, where truth replaces belief, and where freedom costs everything you thought you were. This is the part they never put on the Instagram quotes, the part that doesn't sell, the part no one prepares you for, because real awakening isn't cute. It's not marketable. It's not soft or gentle. It's a death, the death of illusion, the death of ego, the death of the mask you spent your whole life learning to wear. And from that death, something else begins to rise, not the version of you that tries to be spiritual, but the one that always was. Underneath the pain, underneath the performance, underneath the noise. So if your world is falling apart, if you feel like you're unraveling, you're not broken, you're becoming. You're not losing yourself. You're finally starting to remember who you were before the world told you who to be. Welcome to the real beginning, the one no one warned you about, the one that burns before it frees. We were promised peace, that if we just meditated enough, if we raised our vibration, if we healed our trauma, aligned our chakras, practiced gratitude, visualized our future, then one day we'd arrive at this permanent state of bliss. No more pain, no more confusion, just light, just joy, just peace. That was the myth, and we believed it, because who wouldn't want that? A fast track to serenity, an escape hatch from the madness of this world, a promise that once you awaken, you'd finally feel free. But awakening doesn't feel like freedom at first. It feels like being ripped out of a dream you didn't know you were asleep in. Because true awakening isn't about floating in some eternal state of happiness. It's about waking up to everything. The beauty, yes, but also the suffering, the lies, the contradictions, the unbearable truths. And for many, that awareness hits like a wave they didn't see coming. You see it all more clearly than ever before. The illusion of society, the pain people hide behind smiles, the emptiness behind success, the manipulation in media, religion, politics, the places where you've betrayed yourself to fit in. And in that clarity, something shatters. The old comforts disappear. The bliss you were chasing slips through your fingers. Because awakening is not a high. It's not a spiritual bypass. It's not about avoiding suffering. It's about being with it fully, without flinching. As spiritual teacher Jack Cornfield once said, after the ecstasy, the laundry. The real work begins after the peak experience, when the bliss fades and life still needs living, still needs cleaning, still needs confronting. The myth of constant bliss is one of the most dangerous illusions in modern spirituality. It sets people up to fail, to believe that if they're still struggling, they must be doing something wrong, that they're not high vibe enough, that they're not spiritual enough. But struggle is part of the path, and anyone who tells you otherwise is selling a product, not a truth. Even the great mystics knew this. In the writings of St. John of the Cross, he described the dark night of the soul, a painful, disorienting phase of spiritual evolution that must be crossed before one can embody divine union. The Buddha faced temptation and doubt under the Bodhi tree before enlightenment ever arrived. Jesus retreated into the wilderness for 40 days and nights before his mission began. Bliss was never the beginning. It was the result of deep purification, a reward, not a shortcut. So if you've been chasing the light, but keep stumbling into your shadows, you're not lost, you're on the way, because peace isn't found in avoiding the storm. It's found in standing within it, unwavering. And joy, real joy, doesn't come from bypassing pain. It comes from transforming it. The myth of bliss tells you awakening will lift you out of the human experience. But the truth is, it drops you deeper into it. You feel more. You cry more. You notice suffering that once passed you by. You connect with a deeper kind of empathy, because now you see, not just with your eyes, but with your soul. And that is the beginning of real peace. Not the kind that floats above pain, but the kind that holds it, breathes through it, and loves anyway. Somewhere along the way, spirituality became a brand. What was once a sacred path walked in silence through deserts and forests and lifetimes of practice is now a scrollable carousel of enlightenment hacks, sold in bite-sized pieces to keep your nervous system just regulated enough to keep consuming. Awakening became aesthetic. It became a look, a vibe, a market, crystals, affirmations, $200 yoga mats, retreats that promise transcendence in a weekend, manifestation journals made in factories that exploit the very souls we claim to be healing. The new spirituality promises peace, but what it really sells is dopamine, because true awakening doesn't give you a dopamine hit. It's not sexy. It doesn't look good in an Instagram reel. It looks like crying in your car after realizing the life you built was based on who you thought you had to be. It looks like losing friends because your truth no longer matches theirs. It looks like sitting in silence, not to manifest a new car, but to grieve the version of you that had to die for this rebirth to begin. But that version doesn't sell well, and so awakening was packaged, polished, filtered, turned into a product line. You're not just buying books, you're buying identities. I'm a 5D being. I'm high frequency only. I'm manifesting my soul tribe. And it feels good to say those things until the reality hits. You still feel empty. You still feel anxious. You still don't know who you are. Because chasing enlightenment like a product is the ultimate distraction. It's not transformation. It's spiritual entertainment. And here's the danger. It looks like awakening. It sounds like wisdom, but it doesn't change you. As philosopher Alan Watts once said, you cannot get rid of the ego by having the idea of getting rid of the ego. The ego simply puts on a new robe and calls itself awakened. This is what Chogyam Trungpa warned of in his book Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism. The tendency to turn spirituality itself into a tool for ego inflation, a trophy, a way to feel superior. And in that pursuit, we miss the point entirely, because awakening is not a brand. It is not a dopamine rush. It is not a lifestyle. It is a breakdown, a stripping away, a death of who you thought you were. So the truth can finally rise. And that truth, it doesn't need to be sold. It can't be bought. It lives in silence, in surrender, in spaces that marketing can't touch. So if you've been chasing awakening like a prize, take a breath, let go. Because the real path isn't found in the algorithm. It's found when the noise stops and there's nothing left but your naked soul. And the truth, it's been trying to whisper beneath all the noise. That's where the real journey begins. Not with a purchase, not with a post, but with a pause, a sacred pause, to remember what can never be branded. There is a truth no one tells you when you begin to awaken. That truth is pain, not the kind you can medicate, not the kind you can ignore with affirmations or sage, not the kind that passes in a day. This pain runs deeper. It doesn't ask for your permission. It erupts from the quiet corners of your soul. Because awakening doesn't just expand your love, it expands your perception. Your awareness becomes sharper, wider, more sensitive. And that means, so does your ability to feel what hurts. Suddenly, the distractions that used to work don't. The noise you once used to numb yourself becomes unbearable. The people who once made you laugh now leave you feeling hollow. The life you built no longer fits. Why? Because the veil is lifting. And behind that veil is everything you've buried. Every unspoken grief, every hidden trauma, every emotion you labeled as too much or not spiritual enough. Carl Jung said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. And this is what most spiritual teachings leave out. Because pain doesn't sell, but pain is sacred. It's the crack in the armor. The invitation to feel what your soul has been carrying for years. Generational pain, collective grief, the weight of pretending you were okay when you weren't. It comes in waves. And when it hits, it doesn't ask you to understand it. It asks you to feel it. This is why so many people quit the path before it truly begins, because they think something's gone wrong. I thought awakening was supposed to make me feel better. I thought I'd be lighter, freer, happier. And yes, those moments do come, but they don't come first. First comes the unraveling, because you cannot carry your pain into your next chapter. You cannot ascend while still dragging the weight of what you've avoided. So the soul brings it all forward, not to punish you, but to free you. And that freedom doesn't begin in bliss. It begins in the fire. That fire burns the illusions, the stories, the masks, until all that's left is truth. And truth doesn't always feel good. But it is good, because once you face what hurts, you begin to reclaim parts of yourself that were never broken, only buried. So if you're hurting right now, if your heart feels raw, your world upside down, you are not failing. You are awakening. You are stepping through the threshold where light meets shadow and wholeness begins. And yes, it's painful, but it's sacred, because on the other side of that pain is power, not the kind that dominates, but the kind that heals. And the more you're willing to feel, the more you begin to remember. You were never meant to escape this world. You were meant to feel it all, so you could transcend it fully awake. When people hear the word ego, they picture arrogance, pride, self-importance, someone who walks into a room and needs to be the center of it. But that's just the surface. That's not the ego. That's one of its masks. To truly awaken, you have to meet the real ego. And what you'll find is this: the ego isn't just about thinking you're better than others. It's the voice inside your head that says, "This is who I am." The ego is the story. It's the name, the job, the personality. It's the collection of memories, opinions, labels, and traumas you've called me your entire life. It's not evil. It's not the enemy. It's a survival mechanism, a structure your mind created to make sense of a world that was, at times, too big, too fast, too overwhelming. But the moment awakening begins, something radical happens. You start to realize you are not the voice in your head. You are not the stories you tell. You are not your past. You are not even your thoughts. And that realization, it terrifies the ego. Because awakening isn't about killing the ego. It's about seeing it clearly, unplugging from the illusion that you are it. And the moment you do, the ego fights back. Because the ego survives by being believed, by convincing you that without it, you are nothing. It will whisper, "If I'm not in control, who will protect you? If you let go of this identity, you'll disappear." It clings to your achievements, your titles, even your wounds. It says, "This pain is who I am. This anger is justified. This fear keeps me safe." But what if none of that is true? What if your essence, the real you, existed before those thoughts ever arrived? Eckhart Tolle writes, "The ego tends to equate having with being. I have, therefore I am. And the more I have, the more I am." But when awakening hits, this illusion shatters. You begin to feel the tension between who you really are and who you've been pretending to be. And in that space, the ego will panic. It might lash out, or collapse, or wear a spiritual mask to survive, saying, "Look how enlightened I am now." But make no mistake, that is the ego's last stand, because the ego doesn't die a graceful death. It disorients, distracts. It will do anything to hold on, to stay relevant, to stay alive. That's why the path of awakening isn't peaceful at first. It's war, not against the world, but within, between the illusion and the truth, between the mask and the mirror. And when you finally see the ego for what it is, not a monster, but a frightened child, you begin to loosen its grip, not by force, but by presence. Because the ego can't survive in awareness, and the more you witness it, without judgment, without feeding it, the more it begins to dissolve. Not because you destroyed it, but because you stop believing it. And that is the beginning of freedom. The ego doesn't always show up as pride or control. Sometimes it wears white robes. Sometimes it speaks in a soft voice. Sometimes it quotes Rumi and calls itself awakened. Because once the ego realizes it can't survive through fear or dominance, it evolves. It puts on a new mask, a spiritual one. It says things like, I'm healing, I've transcended, I'm more conscious than the people around me. It trades in suits for mala beads. It swaps ambition for enlightenment. But make no mistake, it's still the ego. Only now it's cloaked in light. This is the most dangerous version of all, because when the ego becomes spiritual, it no longer sees itself as ego. It sees itself as truth, as purity, as divine authority, and in that illusion, it becomes nearly invisible. It's what Chogyam Trungpa called spiritual materialism. Using spirituality to reinforce the very identity we're trying to transcend. Instead of dissolving the ego, we decorate it. We build it altars. We give it crystals. We feed it with likes and shares and followers who validate our awakening. We become attached to the image of being conscious and unconsciously create a new prison. It's not always obvious. Sometimes it's subtle. It shows up in the way we dismiss others. They're not awake yet. She's operating from her lower self. He's not on my frequency. We start creating hierarchies. Between the awakened and the asleep, the high vibrational and the low, the divine and the ignorant. But the moment you believe your path makes you superior, you've missed the point entirely, because true awakening isn't about elevation, it's about humility. Ram Dass once said, "The ego wants to edge God out. It wants to be special, but the soul, it just wants to love." When the ego becomes spiritual, it still wants to be special. Only now it seeks specialness through enlightenment. But the soul doesn't care about status. It doesn't need to prove anything. It doesn't need to be seen. It simply is. The spiritual ego is seductive because it feels good. You meditate. You fast. You go on retreats. And yes, these things are powerful. But the question is, why are you doing them? Is it to get closer to truth? Or to be seen as someone who's closer to truth? This is where the spiritual journey becomes razor thin, a tightrope between surrender and performance. And the only way to walk it is with awareness, to constantly question, am I doing this for growth or for identity? Am I truly present or am I performing presence? This vigilance is not about guilt, it's about honesty. Because if the ego has one final card to play, it's this one, the enlightened self-image. But awakening doesn't need a name tag. It doesn't need to be posted or branded or sold. Real awakening is invisible. It's not in your words. It's in your silence. It's not in what you claim to be. It's in what you're willing to lose. So take off the robes, remove the mask, and meet yourself. Without a label, only then can you truly begin to awaken. You've been told your whole life that you're special, unique, chosen, a soul on a sacred mission. And in many ways, you are. But here's the paradox no one warns you about. Your specialness, the very identity you've clung to for meaning, is the very thing that must dissolve for you to awaken. This is where the ego tries one last move. It takes the spiritual path and turns it into a pedestal. Not for truth, not for service, but for itself. I'm more evolved than others. I've awakened to higher levels of truth. I'm beyond the illusions that still trap them. Sound familiar? It's subtle. It doesn't sound like arrogance. It sounds like clarity. But underneath it is a deep fear of being nobody. This is the moment many seekers turn back, because true awakening isn't the ego being upgraded into a more spiritual version of itself. It's the realization that there was never a separate you to begin with. No titles, no identity, no chosen one, just consciousness, aware of itself. And in that realization, there is grief. The self you tried so hard to become dies. The narrative of being important collapses. The spotlight dims, and you are left with the vast, silent truth. You are not special. You are everything. You are the ocean, not the wave. This is not nihilism, it's liberation. Because when you let go of needing to be special, you stop performing, you stop comparing, you stop striving for worth. And in that space, something extraordinary happens. You start to see, truly see. The tree doesn't try to outgrow the forest. It simply exists, rooted, expansive, in harmony with all that is. The same is true for you. When you release the need to be above anyone else on the path, you begin to feel the collective heartbeat. You sense the suffering of others, not from a pedestal, but from presence. And compassion pours in, not pity, not spiritual charity, but a knowing, a remembrance that we are all in this together. Carl Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But what if who you truly are isn't a personality, or a role, or a story? What if it's just awareness? That's the terrifying beauty of awakening. You lose yourself and gain everything. You surrender your name and remember your nature. You give up your specialness and step into the sacred, not above anyone, not below, just here, now infinite. And in that humility, you find your freedom. The ego doesn't fear awakening because it's evil. It fears awakening because it thinks it's dying. To the ego, consciousness expanding isn't liberation, it's annihilation. Imagine a character in a story suddenly realizing they're not the author, that the lines they speak, the identity they wear, the journey they think they're on, is just a page in a much greater book. That's what awakening does. It tears down the walls the ego has spent a lifetime building. Walls made of ideas like, I am this body, I am my history, I am what they did to me, I am what I've achieved. But none of that is true. And deep down, the ego knows it. So it fights. It resists. Not with weapons, but with thoughts. Why are you doing this? This path is dangerous. You're losing yourself. It floods your mind with fear, confusion, distraction. Anything to keep you from crossing that threshold. Because to awaken is to let go of everything that was ever used to define you. Your trauma, your titles, even your wounds, especially your wounds. Eckhart Tolle once said, "The ego strengthens itself through complaining and reacting. Every complaint feeds it." Now imagine what happens when you stop feeding it. Silence, stillness, emptiness. The ego interprets that stillness as death. But what it doesn't understand is that it's actually rebirth. What dies is not you, but the illusion of you. What's left is pure awareness, presence, peace that no story can disrupt. This is why awakening often feels like grief, because you're mourning a version of yourself that never truly existed, but felt so real. The brain itself even resists. Neurologically, the ego is tied to the default mode network, the region of the brain responsible for self-referential thought. When that network quiets, as seen in deep meditation or even near-death experiences, the sense of a solid, separate self begins to dissolve. And this triggers the nervous system, because to the mind, I don't exist equals danger, But here's the truth. You've never existed in the way you thought you did. Not as a name, not as a persona, not as a static identity fixed in time. You are consciousness, fluid, aware, infinite. The ego doesn't want you to realize that, because once you do, it can no longer control you. No more fear-based decisions, no more reactionary living, no more needing others to validate who you are. The ego is not your enemy, but it is afraid. It's the child clinging to a nightlight, terrified of the dark, not knowing the darkness holds stars. So when fear arises on your path, breathe. Let it come, let it tremble, let it scream, and then let it go. Because on the other side of ego's death is your soul's birth, and that is the beginning of everything. You think you're waking up into light, but sometimes what meets you first is darkness, not evil, not punishment, but the shadow, the part of you that's been waiting to be seen. The shadow self isn't new. It's not something that appears after you awaken. It's always been there, quietly watching from beneath the surface, hidden beneath your habits, your coping mechanisms, your curated identity. And then awakening begins, and suddenly you feel exposed. The truth, you cannot wake up without first facing what you've been asleep to. Carl Jung, who coined the term shadow self, said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." This is what the path demands, a descent before the rise. At first, the shadow surfaces as discomfort, a sharp edge in your peace, an old wound flaring up with no explanation, sudden resentment, unexplainable shame, a reaction you didn't see coming, but felt all too deeply. These aren't random. They are the echoes of the parts of you you've silenced, the anger you buried, the envy you denied, the fear you spiritualized. Awakening doesn't remove these, it reveals them. And that's the moment most people turn back, because it's easier to chase higher vibrations than it is to sit with your inner darkness. Easier to light incense than it is to confront your jealousy. Easier to meditate than to admit you're still carrying childhood pain, still performing, still pretending. But the shadow doesn't go away because you ignore it. It grows, it acts out, it sabotages, not to hurt you, but to be heard. And so it rises, in your relationships, in your work, in the mirror. This is not punishment. This is the invitation. The shadow is not here to shame you. It's here to free you. Because when you face the parts of yourself you've long rejected, something sacred happens. You stop being fragmented. You stop being at war with yourself. You begin to integrate. Jung also wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." Every trigger is a trail. Every discomfort, a doorway. Every judgment, a reflection. The shadow is not your enemy. It is your teacher. And when you finally meet it, not with resistance, but with reverence, you begin to see the truth. That the parts of you that were buried hold the power you've been searching for. The anger becomes boundaries. The fear becomes courage. The grief becomes depth. The shame becomes humility. And you begin to walk not as someone chasing light, but as someone whole. So if the shadow has arrived, don't run. Sit. Listen. Hold it like a child who is never allowed to speak. Because now, it's finally time to remember. There's a moment in every awakening when the light feels distant. Not because you've fallen, but because something deeper is surfacing. Not bliss, not serenity, but emotion. Raw, visceral, untamed, rage, jealousy, shame. They rise like waves, powerful, overwhelming, ancient. And suddenly, the path you thought would lead to peace begins to feel like a storm. This isn't a mistake. This is the alchemy of awakening. Because to feel deeply is to heal deeply. And what you're feeling now, it's what's been buried for years, maybe lifetimes. You see, awakening doesn't just unlock higher states of consciousness. It unlocks the emotional vault you've spent your life sealing shut, the rage you inherited but never expressed, the shame planted in childhood that you never questioned, the jealousy you buried beneath your spiritual performance. They were never gone, only hidden. But when the veil lifts, so do the walls, and suddenly, what was numb begins to burn. It's terrifying, because no one told you this would happen. No one told you that awakening might first feel like breaking. No one told you that the higher path includes moments when you want to scream, cry, run, or just disappear. But this too is sacred. In somatic psychology, we know that the body remembers what the mind forgets. Your nervous system stores your unprocessed grief. Your muscles carry unspoken fear. Your chest tightens from years of suppressing your truth. And when awakening comes, it unlocks not just thoughts, but trauma. That's why the fire feels so intense. Because it's not just emotional. It's energetic. It's cellular. It's you, finally waking up to you. This is why ancient wisdom traditions speak of purification. In yogic texts, this process is called tapas, the inner fire that burns away illusion. In Buddhism, it's the confrontation of the kleshas, the afflictive emotions that obscure our clarity. In shamanism, it's the sacred purge, the spiritual vomiting of what no longer serves. And in your life, it's the moment the tears won't stop. The anger takes you by surprise. The shame returns like a ghost you thought you'd buried. But hear this, you are not regressing. You are not failing. You are awakening. Because only when these emotions rise can they be released. Only when they're seen can they be healed. And in that release, you make space. Space for clarity. Space for peace. Space for your true self to return. So if today you feel like you're falling apart, know this, you're not falling apart. You're falling into yourself. Let the tears fall. Let the rage move through you. Let the shame speak its name, because beneath it all is truth, and truth will set you free. You've been told to stay positive, to rise above, to let it go. But what they never explained is the cost of smiling when you're aching, the cost of swallowing words that should have been screamed, the cost of burying grief in the name of being strong. Suppression doesn't make you spiritual, it makes you sick, and it steals more from you than you know. Every emotion you lock away doesn't disappear. It waits in your body, in your bones, in the spaces between your breath. You might not see it, but you feel it. That heaviness in your chest, the fatigue that doesn't go away, no matter how much you sleep, the fog in your mind, the fire that's gone from your eyes. This isn't just burnout, it's energy lost to the unconscious. Because every time you suppress a truth, you invest energy in the lie. It takes work to stay numb. It takes energy to hold back tears, to clench your jaw, to keep the past in a box marked "Don't open." But your system remembers. According to Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, author of The Body Keeps the Score, trauma lives in the body, not just in memory, but in the nervous system. And the more we avoid it, the more our vitality leaks away. Not in one dramatic moment, but in 1,000 silent ways. This is why chronic tension exists. Why your shoulders are tight, why your stomach knots during conflict, why your breath is shallow when you think about that one person, that one event you never dealt with. Energetically, it's all still running in the background, like too many tabs open in your mind, like malware in your soul. And here's the paradox. We think we're avoiding pain, but what we're really avoiding is healing. Because healing means feeling. And we've been taught that feeling is weakness, that anger makes you dangerous, that sadness makes you broken, that grief makes you hard to love. But these are lies passed down through generations, inherited from a world that feared emotion, a world that feared power. Because make no mistake, your emotions are not your enemy. They are your guides, your messengers, your truth. And when you suppress them, you suppress you. Carl Jung once said, "What you resist persists." But more than that, what you resist drains you. That's why letting go is not just a poetic idea, it's a return of energy. Every emotion you integrate gives you something back. Clarity, vitality, presence. So if you've been feeling tired for no reason, if you've been searching for your spark, look not at what's missing, look at what you've locked away. Because the skeletons in your closet, they're not monsters. They're pieces of you waiting to breathe again. And when you finally open the door, when you stop running, when you feel what's been waiting to be felt, you don't just reclaim your energy, you reclaim yourself. They told you to seek the light, to chase bliss, to transcend the pain. But the deeper truth is this: you do not reach the light by escaping the dark. You reach it by walking straight into it. Shadow work isn't a side ritual, it is the path. For many, spirituality becomes an upward climb, a movement toward peace, detachment, higher vibration. But when the shadow emerges, when the unconscious rises, it doesn't feel like ascension. It feels like collapse. And that's where most people turn back. They think they've gone wrong, that the anger, the shame, the grief are signs of regression. They're not. They're the gatekeepers. Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung knew this. He warned that until we make the unconscious conscious, it will rule our lives, and we'll call it fate. Shadow work is that process. It is the art of turning inward, not to judge, but to witness, to see the monster in the basement and realize it was just a part of you asking to be loved. The truth is, the more light you call in, the more shadow you reveal. It's not a glitch in the system. It's how integration works. And here's the secret no one tells you. Your deepest power is hidden in the shadow, not in spite of it, because of it. The parts of you buried, the emotions you disowned, the identities you were taught to hide, they carry your untapped strength, your fire, your voice, your truth. But there's a cost to digging them up. You have to stop performing. You have to surrender the need to be spiritual. You have to let the mask fall. Because shadow work isn't aesthetic. It isn't incense and journals. It's crying on the floor at 2 a.m., realizing the person you've been pretending to be is just that, a performance. It's admitting you're still angry, still bitter, still afraid, and then loving yourself there. The great mystics understood this. Rumi wrote, "The wound is where the light enters you." He wasn't speaking metaphorically. He was pointing to the alchemy that happens when pain is seen, truly seen, without resistance. In every sacred tradition, initiation begins with descent. Before enlightenment, there is undoing. Before expansion, contraction. Before union, separation. So if your awakening feels heavy right now, if everything you thought you healed is rising again, If your meditation brings more chaos than calm, you're not failing. You're walking the real path, the path that burns away illusion, the path that strips you down to your essence, the path that doesn't ask you to rise above yourself, but to come home to all of you, even the parts you were taught to exile. Shadow work is not the obstacle to awakening. It is the threshold. Cross it, and everything changes. It's easy to think the problem is out there, that the person who triggered you, the one who made your blood boil, your chest tighten, your walls rise, is the villain. But what if they're just the mirror? What if the discomfort they awaken is really about you? Carl Jung once said, "Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves." This is not a metaphor. It's the core mechanism of shadow projection. You see, the human psyche is wired to protect. It stores away what it deems unsafe, unacceptable, unlovable. And instead of acknowledging it in ourselves, we start seeing it vividly in the people around us. Someone's arrogance grates on you. Someone's neediness makes you want to pull away. Someone's confidence feels like a personal threat, and without realizing it, you're reacting not to them, but to the part of yourself you've refused to see. This is the law of projection. Whatever is disowned internally gets projected externally. That's why relationships, more than any meditation or mantra, will show you your work, especially the difficult ones, especially the people you wish you could cut out of your life. They're the teachers, the co-worker who challenges your authority, the family member who never listens, the partner who brings out your worst self. They are all mirrors, reflecting back the fractures in your being. And here's the twist. It doesn't mean their behavior is right or justified. It means it's revealing. Because if someone's words didn't already live inside you, even faintly, they wouldn't land so deeply. They wouldn't rattle you. They wouldn't stir something primal. Take this in. Every time you say, "That person is so," ask yourself, where does that live in me? This doesn't mean blame yourself. It means know yourself. Because when you do, those emotional landmines lose their charge. You stop being ruled by your triggers. You start reading them, decoding them, like sacred messages. Breadcrumbs from your unconscious saying, "Here, look here." This is where you're still not free. The real power, it's when you no longer need others to change in order for you to find peace. Because you've changed, because you've faced what their presence activates in you and healed it at the root. This is why spiritual growth isn't about escaping people. It's about using every encounter as fuel for transformation. And sometimes the ones who irritate you the most are showing you the parts of yourself that are most ready to be reclaimed. So next time you're triggered, pause, feel, then ask, what is this really about? What story is surfacing? What piece of me is asking to be seen? Because in that moment, you're not just reacting, you're being invited into a deeper awakening, one that doesn't happen above the mess, but right in the middle of it. Relationships, they're not just part of the human experience, they are the human experience. And for those walking a spiritual path, they become the classroom. Not a gentle classroom, with soft lectures and tidy notes. Number, it's the kind where every interaction is a pop quiz for your soul. Romantic partners, parents, siblings, friends, even those people you wish you could avoid forever. They are all assignments in your curriculum of awakening, because when you sit alone in meditation, it's easy to feel at peace. When life is still, it's easy to feel enlightened. But the moment another person enters the room, your real work begins. Suddenly your wounds are activated. Old stories get triggered. Unconscious patterns rise to the surface like smoke from a long, dormant fire. Why? Because the soul doesn't just want serenity. It wants liberation. And that liberation happens through friction. The kind that forces you to look at your attachment styles, your control issues, your fear of abandonment, your resistance to intimacy. According to spiritual teacher Ram Dass, if you think you're enlightened, go spend a week with your family. He wasn't joking. He was naming the paradox. It's in the mess, the chaos, the relational storms, that our deepest shadows and deepest truths emerge. Romantic relationships especially are powerful portals. They open you, expose you, reveal not just your desire for love, but all the ways you've armored yourself against it. Your partner isn't there to complete you. They're there to reflect you, to hold up a mirror to the parts of yourself still unhealed, still unmet. Maybe you run when things get hard. Maybe you cling when things feel uncertain. Maybe you manipulate, or shut down, or hide behind perfection. Whatever your pattern, you didn't invent it in that relationship. You brought it there. And that's the point. You were meant to see it, so you can finally break the cycle. But it's not just lovers. The parent who never saw you, the sibling who always criticized you, the boss who triggers your rage, even the stranger on the street who rubs you the wrong way. Each is a lesson. Each is a mirror. Each is an invitation. Sometimes it's an invitation to set a boundary. Sometimes it's an invitation to soften. Sometimes it's a lesson in compassion, or forgiveness, or learning to walk away. But no matter what form it takes, relationship is not separate from spirituality. It is the fastest path, the most precise mirror, the deepest challenge, and the greatest teacher, because in learning how to love others, truly, you discover how to love yourself. And in learning to hold space for others' wounds, you begin to heal your own. This is why isolation isn't the answer. Real transformation doesn't happen in caves. It happens in connection. Because the soul doesn't awaken in theory. It awakens in practice. And every relationship is the practice. To integrate the shadow is not to become it. Let that sink in for a moment. Because somewhere along the path of awakening, a misunderstanding creeps in. It whispers that owning your darkness means expressing it. That to be whole, you must act out every buried impulse. That authenticity requires indulgence. But that's not integration. That's identification. There is a dangerous confusion in the modern spiritual world. A distortion where shadow work becomes an excuse for unchecked behavior, where anger becomes aggression, where truth becomes cruelty, where the inner child becomes the ruler of the adult. And when that happens, we are no longer liberating the shadow. We are feeding it. Carl Jung, the father of shadow psychology, never said to become your shadow. He said to make it conscious, to bring it into awareness, to integrate it into your field of wholeness, not to let it drive the car. Imagine this. There's a part of you that craves attention, another that wants control, one that's terrified of being vulnerable, and another that longs to dominate just to feel safe. Those parts are real. They're in the shadow, but they are not your highest self. Integration means saying to them, I see you, I hear you, I understand why you're here. But it does not mean take over, run the show, act as me. This is where discernment comes in. The ability to feel an emotion fully, without reacting impulsively. To let rage move through you without burning down the world. To feel envy rise up, and instead of judging or suppressing it, curiously ask what it's pointing to. Integration is the sacred art of holding your shadow without becoming a slave to it, is the alchemist's path, not suppressing, not exploding, transmuting. You see, the moment you act from the shadow unconsciously, you're not healing. You're repeating, projecting old pain, inflicting the same wound, this time on someone else. But when you pause, breathe, observe, when you can say, "This is my fear speaking. This is my old survival pattern. This is a part of me, but not all of me." That's integration. That's awakening. And it's not always glamorous. It takes restraint. It takes humility. It takes learning how to sit with uncomfortable emotions without needing to discharge them onto others. As Gabor Mate writes, the attempt to escape from pain creates more pain. But presence, pure presence, transforms the pain into power. So no, integration doesn't mean indulging every thought, every urge, every story your mind tells you. It means being the space that can hold it all, without losing yourself in any of it. The shadow wants to be seen. It wants to be acknowledged. It does not want to be unleashed. And when you learn the difference, your life changes. There is something ancient living in your shadow, a raw force, a primal fire, one that, for most of your life, has been buried beneath shame, denial, and fear. But what if the very parts of you that you've spent years hiding were never meant to be destroyed, but transformed? Because here's the truth no one tells you. Your shadow is not just your wound. It is your power, not the kind of power that dominates, manipulates, or controls, but the kind of power that liberates, that moves through you like divine fire, that clears everything false and leaves only what's real. Jung wrote, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Because in that darkness is the sacred fuel you've been searching for. Every time you denied your voice to keep the peace, there was power. Every time you hid your anger to be accepted, there was power. Every time you abandoned yourself for love, you left behind a piece of your power. And now, you're being called to retrieve it. You see, shadow work isn't just about healing wounds. It's about remembering who you were before the world told you who to be. It's about walking back into the rooms where you dimmed your light and turning it back on. But here's the paradox. The shadow will not give you its gifts until you stop trying to fix it. It doesn't want to be judged. It doesn't want to be bypassed with affirmations. It wants to be met, held, listened to, because underneath that rage is a boundary that was never honored. Under that jealousy, a desire you were told you didn't deserve. Under that shame, a wild, untamed truth that was never safe to speak. When you bring awareness into these places, not to fix but to witness, something begins to shift. What once looked like chaos starts to reveal intelligence. What once felt like darkness becomes depth, and what once felt like a burden becomes your medicine. This is what the mystics knew. The alchemists didn't turn lead into gold by avoiding the lead. They turned toward it and activated transformation from within. So what if your shadow is the lead? And what if your soul was always the fire? To awaken is not to transcend the shadow. It is to descend into it, to meet yourself in the most unfiltered places and find divinity there. That's when power is born, not from pretending to be light, but from becoming the whole spectrum. So yes, your shadow can destroy you, but if you face it, if you own it, if you learn to dance with it, it becomes your portal, your path, your liberation. There comes a moment in every awakening journey when the ground beneath your feet disappears, not in a dramatic thunderclap kind of way, but quietly, almost imperceptibly. At first it's subtle, a shift in how things feel. The words that once inspired you no longer resonate. The spiritual ideas that used to light your path now seem hollow. The beliefs that once gave you purpose begin to feel like cages. This is the collapse of meaning, and it is not a detour. It is the way forward, because before something new can be born, everything false must fall. We like to think of awakening as gaining new insights, new wisdom, a more expansive view of the world. But rarely do we speak of what awakening takes from you. It takes your certainty, your stories, your spiritual identity, your carefully curated idea of who you are and why you're here. It pulls the thread and watches the entire tapestry unravel. And in the beginning, it feels like death. Because in a way, it is. Viktor Frankl, the existential psychologist who survived Auschwitz, wrote, "When a person can't find a deep sense of meaning, they distract themselves with pleasure. But awakening steals even that. The distractions lose their flavor. The things that once brought comfort no longer soothe. The entertainment, the validation, the goals, the dreams, they all start to dissolve, and you're left standing in an empty field of silence, of space, of not knowing. The mind panics in this space. It wants to cling to the old meaning, to reach for a new identity, to escape the void. But the void is sacred, because within that emptiness is the seed of something real. For the first time, you're not being fed truth. You're being emptied of illusions. Joseph Campbell described it as the hero's journey, the descent into the underworld, not as punishment, but initiation. The collapse of meaning isn't a failure of your spiritual path. It is its most holy phase. It's when the soul says, you are ready to stop borrowing truth and start living from what is real. But real meaning doesn't come from ideas. It arises from presence, from direct contact with the mystery. The mind won't like this. It will scream for structure. It will beg for understanding. But the real you, the deeper you, is learning to find truth not in what can be explained, but in what can only be lived. And this is where the rebirth begins, not in constructing a better belief system, but in shedding every system that kept you from your essence. This is not the end of meaning. It is the death of borrowed meaning. So that life, raw, unfiltered, unspeakably vast, can finally begin speaking to you directly, through experience, through silence, through truth that has no name, but feels like home. There is a silence no one warns you about, a silence that doesn't bring peace, but absence. Not the absence of sound, but of presence. This is the chapter no one wants to speak of, the moment when even God feels gone. It doesn't matter what you call it, source, the universe, the divine, higher self. When the connection you once felt so clearly vanishes into a void, it can feel like the ultimate betrayal, especially when you've walked the path so devotedly, meditated, prayed, listened, sacrificed, healed, transformed. And then one day, the presence you used to feel so intimately is just gone. No signs, no synchronicities, no warm rush of inner knowing, just stillness. And a haunting question: where did it go? The mystics knew this moment well. St. John of the Cross called it La Noche Oscura del Alma, the dark night of the soul, not a punishment, but a sacred purification, because the presence you used to feel, as beautiful as it was still filtered through your ego, still tied to your expectations, still attached to your identity. You expected God to feel like love, like comfort, like reassurance. But what if the divine is so vast, so incomprehensibly wild, that sometimes it has to disappear, to teach you how to find it beyond feeling? Because if your faith depends on constant presence, then it's not faith, it's reward. In this void, you are being stretched, broken open, invited to touch something deeper than comfort, to stop worshipping the feeling of God and begin surrendering to the truth of God, even when it's silent, even when it's distant, even when it feels like abandonment. Thomas Merton, the contemplative monk, wrote, "The absence of God is a kind of presence. The silence of God is an answer. The darkness, a form of light." These aren't poetic metaphors. They are spiritual survival maps, left behind by those who walked this path before you. Because the deeper your consciousness expands, the more subtle truth becomes. It no longer shouts. It no longer speaks in symbols you can decode. It whispers through your breath, through your being, through the fact that you are still here, even in the silence. And maybe that's the whole point. To unhook your soul from needing proof, to wean your spirit off of spiritual highs, to meet the divine not in ecstasy, but in emptiness, because the real presence doesn't come and go. It was never outside you. It was never a voice or a sign or a feeling. It was you, always. And when you learn to be still in that emptiness, when you stop begging for the light to return, something strange begins to happen. The silence becomes sacred, the absence becomes intimate, and the space where God felt gone becomes the very place. You finally come home to the God that never left. There comes a point in every awakening where the world feels distant, not because it has changed, but because you have. Friends don't understand you anymore. Conversations feel hollow. Small talk becomes unbearable. You find yourself withdrawing, not out of sadness, but necessity. This isn't depression. This is initiation. A sacred solitude begins to take hold, one that cannot be explained, only experienced, because no one told you that the most powerful transformations often happen in the dark and in silence. Isolation is not a punishment. It is a rite of passage. Every mystic, prophet, and seeker walked this valley. The Buddha sat under the Bodhi tree, alone. Jesus wandered 40 days in the desert, alone. The desert fathers and mothers retreated from society to seek truth, not in the crowd, but in the stillness. Even Carl Jung, deep in his process of individuation, withdrew to Bollingen Tower to confront his shadow and remember his soul. Why? Because there are parts of you that can only be met in solitude, when there's no one left to impress, no mirror of validation, no distraction to drown in, just you, your thoughts, your wounds, your spirit. And in that stillness, the masks begin to fall. Who you thought you were, who the world told you to be, dissolves in the echo of your own breath. But let's be honest, it's terrifying at first, because when you're alone, you can't run, you can't perform, you can't hide behind roles, relationships, or routine. Everything you've buried comes knocking. Old wounds, ancient fears, unfinished grief, unmet emotions. And still, this is sacred, because healing can't happen when you're distracted. Growth can't unfold when you're constantly seen. Clarity doesn't rise in noise. It needs space. Solitude is where the soul reclaims its voice. But here's the paradox. though you feel alone, you are never truly alone. The very stillness that isolates you is also holding you. The silence is not empty. It's full of intelligence. It is the womb of rebirth. And when you surrender to it, when you stop resisting the loneliness and let it refine you, a quiet power begins to emerge. You no longer need approval. You no longer chase distraction. You begin to embody wholeness without anyone needing to witness it. This is when the world begins to shift again. Not because it changed, but because you did. You walk back into the world, not as someone looking to be filled, but as someone who now overflows, because you met yourself in the fire of your own presence, and you did not turn away. That is the initiation, the part no one can walk for you, the part that turns awakening from an idea into embodiment. And if you're walking through that solitude now, know this: you're not lost, you're becoming. There comes a point in the journey when fighting back only deepens the wound, when the darkness you're wrestling with refuses to move, not because it seeks to destroy you, but because it's waiting for something else. Not control, not domination, but surrender, acceptance. The mind hates this word. It clings to the illusion of progress, of fixing, of solving, of doing. But awakening is not a task. It is a falling, a shedding, a returning. And that return begins, not with resistance, but with release. Pain is not the enemy, it is the messenger. Suffering does not come from feeling pain, but from believing it shouldn't be there. The moment we label our discomfort as wrong, as failure, as punishment, as a deviation from the spiritual path, we trap ourselves in a war with reality, and reality always wins. Carl Jung once said, "We cannot change anything unless we accept it. Condemnation does not liberate, it oppresses." This is the paradox. The deeper you resist the storm, the more it floods you. But the moment you let go, the moment you stop fighting what is, you begin to float. It's not about giving up. It's about giving in to the truth of your experience. To say, yes, this hurts. Yes, I am afraid. Yes, I feel lost. This is not weakness. This is the gateway. Because when you stop pretending that you are somewhere you're not, you gain access to where you really are. And only from there can the shift begin. You see, surrender isn't a collapse. It's a clearing. It's the moment the false self exhausts itself and the true self begins to emerge. In this stillness, in this raw, unfiltered presence, the energy you've spent resisting begins to flow again, and what once felt like an endless void starts to feel like space. Space to breathe, to feel, to see, not through the eyes of the wounded ego, but through the heart of awareness itself. Acceptance is not passive. It is the most courageous act a soul can take. To say yes to the fire is to trust that something within you knows how to rise from ash. This is the quiet alchemy, not the kind you post about, not the kind that wins applause, but the kind that slowly rebuilds you from within. So if you're in the middle of it, if your thoughts are screaming and your heart feels numb, breathe. Stop trying to escape and instead whisper to your pain, "I accept you. You're allowed to be here, and so am I." That's the moment it all begins to change, not because you forced it, but because you stopped trying to. Let the shift begin. The stories we tell ourselves are seductive. They give us shape. They give us identity. They give us a sense of control. I am this. I am not that. This is who I've always been. This is what happened to me. This is why I am the way I am. But in the silence of awakening, those stories begin to unravel, and the ego panics. Because ego is not just arrogance, it's not just pride, it is structure, the scaffolding of self-perception. And when that scaffolding begins to tremble, the ego clings harder. You start to feel it as inner noise, the sudden urge to define yourself, to reattach to an identity, to say, I'm spiritual, or I've evolved, or even, I'm broken. It doesn't matter if the story is flattering or tragic. What matters is that it gives the ego a hook, a way to stay alive. But awakening doesn't come to reinforce who you are. It comes to reveal who you're not. And this is where the pain begins. Because the ego has spent your whole life collecting pieces, labels, titles, memories, roles. It has curated a museum of self, and awakening walks in like a storm, sweeping through the halls. Suddenly, your trauma no longer defines you. Your job doesn't validate you. Even your beliefs start to crack under the pressure of truth. And the ego fights this. It calls it betrayal. It calls it madness. It will whisper things like, you're losing yourself. But the truth is, you're shedding the false self. This is what Ram Dass meant when he said, we're all just walking each other home. Not to our roles, not to our stories, but to what we've always been beneath them. Still, silent, infinite. The ego wants certainty. It wants a script, a polished image of who you are. But the soul wants truth. And truth doesn't come with a clean narrative. It comes with silence. It comes with chaos. It comes with disintegration. And in that disintegration, you begin to glimpse something else. Not the end, but the beginning. Not a loss, but a rebirth. Because once you've watched the story fall apart and still felt your own presence underneath it, you begin to realize you were never the story. You were the awareness holding it, the witness behind the mask, the vastness behind the name. And in that space, the real work begins. The ego will resist this death with everything it has. But that resistance is the very fire that forges the new you. Not the version polished for approval, not the identity rooted in fear, but the version that's always been waiting beneath the surface, quiet, grounded and real. This is not annihilation, it's liberation. Let the story fall. You were never it anyway. There's a fear that's deeper than death, not the fear of your heart stopping, not the fear of a final breath, but the fear of dissolving, of vanishing, of no longer existing as a you. It creeps in during awakening, not in loud screams, but in subtle tremors, a soft panic behind the eyes, a trembling in the gut when silence gets too quiet. Because as the old self begins to unravel, you feel something terrifying. The identity you've always known is slipping, and the mind doesn't know what to do with that. For so long, it believed in solid ground. I am my story. I am my pain. I am my accomplishments. I am this body, this face, this name. But awakening calls all of that into question, not just intellectually, but viscerally. You start to feel the truth. There's no one behind the curtain. The self you thought you were was a construct, a brilliant, fragile, ever-changing arrangement of thoughts, emotions, memories, labels. And when that begins to fade, the fear arrives. Not because you're in danger, but because the mind is losing its anchor. Carl Jung once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul." And now you know why. Because the soul is vast, it's infinite, and infinity is terrifying to a mind that craves definition. So it resists, it clutches at roles, it begs to be somebody, even if that somebody is wounded, even if that somebody is suffering. Because suffering still gives you form, still gives you identity, but awakening isn't here to make you comfortable, it's here to make you free. And that freedom requires surrender. Surrender to formlessness, to stillness, to being the sky, not the clouds. The ego fears this deeply. It whispers, "If I let go, there will be nothing left." But the truth is, what dissolves is not your being, it's the illusion of separation. What disappears is not you, but everything you were never meant to carry. The need to prove, to compare, to control, to hold on. The fear of dissolution is not a flaw, it is part of the threshold. A sacred panic that signals transformation is near. You're not dying, you're expanding. You are the drop of water realizing it was always the ocean. This fear is not a sign to turn back. It is a sign to go deeper. Because on the other side of dissolution is peace beyond words. Not a peace you can grasp, but one that simply is. There's no shortcut, no bypass. You must feel it. Let it tremble through you. Let it break you open. And then, let it go. You will not vanish. You will only dissolve into truth. There is a trap on the spiritual path, more subtle than pride, more seductive than pleasure. It's the illusion of arrival, the belief that you've awakened, that you've made it, that now, you know. Now you see. The ego, clever as ever, learns to speak in mantras. It cloaks itself in white robes. It quotes Rumi and pretends to be the soul. It nods in stillness while secretly craving recognition. It doesn't die, it just transforms. And suddenly, you are not the one awakening. You are the awakened one, the guru, the light worker, the one who knows better. This is the false enlightenment trap, a spiritual identity, crafted by the same ego you once sought to dissolve. It tells you you're special, more conscious, more evolved. And it feels good, better than any addiction, because now your sense of self is infused with divinity, but it's still a sense of self. As Chogyam Trungpa warned in Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism, ego will use even the path of awakening as a tool to reinforce its own survival. It'll memorize teachings, it'll seek out mystical experiences, it'll even master silence and solitude, not for union, but for status. This identity is reinforced by others. Social media algorithms reward the awakened brand. Followers mirror back your spiritual persona, and slowly, almost imperceptibly, the mask becomes real. You may still meditate, still do breath work, still study sacred texts, but underneath it all, a quiet superiority festers. You begin to separate yourself from the world again. Only this time, it's not as an outsider, but as someone who has risen above it. And that is the true danger. Because awakening is not about rising above. It's about falling into life, into your body, into your shadow, into the heartbreak of being fully human, to see yourself in the homeless man, to recognize your shadow in the person who triggers you most, to know that enlightenment is not a destination, but a moment-to-moment surrender. The moment you believe you've reached the top, you've already fallen asleep again. Real awakening dissolves identity. It doesn't build a new one. It makes you humble, quiet, ordinary. It strips away the need to be seen as spiritual. Because in truth, there's no enlightened person, only enlightenment moving through whoever is present enough to receive it. And sometimes, that's not you. Sometimes, it's the stranger who says nothing, who holds space, who loves without labels. The deeper you go, the more you realize there is no one to become. There is only now, only presence, only the breath, without a name. So when the ego whispers, "You've made it," smile gently and let that identity fall too, because the real journey has only just begun. At first, awakening feels like a breakdown. Everything you thought you were begins to unravel. The beliefs, the labels, the stories you clung to for safety, they begin to dissolve. And it's terrifying, because who are you without the story? Who are you if not the one who was wronged, who overcame, who achieved, who suffered? This is the sacred unraveling, the invitation to disidentify, to step back from the noise and meet the silence beneath it. Because you are not the narrative. You are not the victim, the warrior, the seeker, or even the one awakening. You are the one who sees. Awareness, pure and wordless. This is not an idea to understand. It is a shift in where you stand. Most of our suffering comes not from what happens, but from the stories we build around it. I'm not good enough. I always get abandoned. No one understands me. This means I'm failing. Each thought weaves a thread until we're wrapped in a cocoon of mental noise we mistake for identity. But if you pause and watch, you'll notice something subtle. There's a space between you and the thought, a witness, a presence that isn't moved by the chaos. This space is freedom. Eckhart Tolle calls it the pain body, that collection of thoughts and emotions we unconsciously identify with. But when you begin to observe rather than attach, you weaken the grip of the false self. You start to see that even your deepest wounds are not you. They are experiences, passing clouds in the sky of your being. The mind wants control. It thrives on identity, but consciousness wants peace. Disidentification doesn't mean detachment from life. It means coming fully into life without the filter of judgment or narrative. When someone hurts you, you don't spiral into a story. You feel the pain and let it move through. When fear arises, you don't become the fearful one. You breathe and let it speak, without letting it steer. This is what true inner peace feels like. Not the absence of emotions, but the absence of identification. And the more you rest in this awareness, the less effort it takes. Thoughts come and go. Emotions rise and fall. And still, you remain still, spacious, free. Ramana Maharshi once said, "Real peace is happiness. It is not the emotion called happiness. It is peace which cannot be disturbed." When you stop believing every thought, when you stop defending a fixed identity, you become soft, open, limitless. You stop needing to prove, to justify, to explain, because who you are needs no defense. You are not the storm. You are the sky. And no matter how wild the winds may howl, the sky remains untouched. This is the peace that no one can take from you, because it was never given. It's what you've always been, the watcher, the witness, the awareness behind it all. Always here, always home. It's subtle, so subtle you might not even notice it. That quiet voice that says, "I've awakened. I see more than others do. I've transcended the drama. I'm not like them anymore." And just like that, the ego rises again, this time cloaked in robes of light. This is the final illusion, spiritual elitism. It whispers, you're on a higher plane. You've done the work, others haven't. You see the matrix, they're still asleep. And in a single breath, awakening becomes hierarchy. Division, separation, the very thing it was meant to dissolve. It's the most cunning trick the ego plays, transforming growth into status, using the language of evolution to justify superiority. You start judging others not by their hearts, but by their practices, their vibration, their level of consciousness. But what is true consciousness if it divides instead of includes? The mystics didn't speak from pedestals. They sat with beggars, walked among the broken, touched the untouchable. They knew what we forget. That real awakening humbles you, because when you truly see, you don't feel above others. You feel one with them. You recognize their pain as your own past pain, their blindness as a place you once stood, their patterns as echoes you still wrestle with. There is no hierarchy in presence, only honesty. Spiritual elitism is a shield, a way to avoid vulnerability. As Brené Brown writes, pride is the armor of the insecure, and many wear spiritual language like armor because facing their humanity still terrifies them. You can meditate for hours, read every sacred text, cleanse your chakras, fast with the moon. But if your heart closes to another human, if you look down instead of within, you've missed the point. Osho once warned, when spirituality becomes a status symbol, it loses its soul. Real awakening isn't about being seen as awakened. It's about dissolving the need to be seen at all. It's not the loud proclamations of truth. It's the silent choice to forgive, to listen, to remain soft in a world that worships sharpness. The ones who are truly free don't need to prove it. You feel it in their presence. They radiate humility, not as performance, but as essence. They speak less. They love more. They know that life is not a ladder to climb, but a circle to join. Every time you judge another's path, you bind your own. Because judgment is a wall, and walls, no matter how high, block the view. Drop the comparison. Drop the need to be further along. Drop the illusion that you've arrived. There's nowhere to arrive to. Only now. Only here. Only the eternal unfolding of what you already are. And the deeper you go, the more you see everyone is walking home. Some just take longer roads. So bless the long roads. Bless the lost. Bless the ones who trigger you. Bless the ones who still sleep. And as you do, you'll remember the truth. Awakening isn't a crown. It's the moment you kneel, heart open, and whisper, I am no better. I am no worse. I am one with all. At first it feels like freedom. You begin to wake up. You see the patterns, the illusions, the masks people wear. Masks you once wore too. You start to detach from the chaos, the drama, the small talk, the need to fit in. And in that silence, there's peace, clarity. You finally feel like you. But then something unexpected happens. The world begins to feel distant. You try to connect, but your words don't land. You speak of energy, of presence, of purpose. But their eyes glaze over. You feel like you're speaking a different language, like you've crossed into a place where few can follow. And slowly, almost without noticing, you begin to withdraw. It's not bitterness. It's not arrogance. It's loneliness. Because awakening, while deeply liberating, can also be deeply isolating. Not everyone understands the grief. That comes with awareness. The mourning of an old self, an old world, an old way of relating. So you retreat, not because you want to be alone, but because being around others feels like disconnection instead of connection. But here's the paradox. True awakening isn't meant to separate you. It's meant to unite you. As Ram Dass said, we're all just walking each other home. Yet in the early stages of awakening, many forget this. They confuse solitude with superiority, or they assume they've outgrown everyone, when really, they've just forgotten how to meet people. From a place of heart, not head. Yes, you've changed. Yes, you see differently now. But the goal was never to escape the world. It was to return to it, with eyes wide open. Isolation is not the destination. It's a phase, a cocoon, necessary, but temporary. If you stay there too long, you begin to believe the lie that no one else is capable of understanding, that no one else wants to grow, that you're alone in your expansion. But this belief, as convincing as it feels, is just another ego illusion, because everyone, every soul on this planet, is on their own awakening path. It may look different. It may move slower. It may hide behind layers of fear and resistance. But it's there. Your job isn't to walk away from the world. It's to walk back in, with compassion, with grace, with a willingness to meet people where they are, without needing them to meet you where you are. Because awakening is not a badge. It's a bridge. And bridges don't isolate. They connect. So if you feel alone, if your path has grown quiet, if your heart aches to be understood, remember this. Your growth is not a punishment. Your awareness is not a burden. You were never meant to walk this road alone, and you won't have to. If you're willing to come down from the mountain and hold someone's hand as they begin their climb. Sometimes the most enlightened thing you can do is to sit with someone in the dark and say, I see you. I've been there too. Let's walk together. We often think of spiritual growth as a vertical ascent, like climbing an invisible ladder towards some distant mountaintop where only the most enlightened reside. We imagine the more we know, the higher we rise. But here's the quiet truth that most miss. Real growth is not measured in how much we know, but in how deeply we love. Not how many books you've read or how advanced your practices are, but in how gently you speak to someone in pain, how present you are when someone feels unseen, how quickly you forgive, even when it hurts. Because awakening isn't about transcending your humanity, it's about becoming more human, more raw, more receptive, more capable of holding space for both the joy and the ache of this life. Compassion isn't just a byproduct of awakening, it's the evidence of it. The Dalai Lama has said, if you want others to be happy, practice compassion. If you want to be happy, practice compassion. He never mentioned enlightenment or reaching a higher vibration, just compassion. And it's here we often realize, sometimes too late, that being spiritual isn't about being right. It's about being kind, even when your mind is tired, even when your shadow rises, even when you're the one aching and all you want is to shut the world out. Many seekers fall into the trap of thinking they've awakened simply because they've learned the words. But real awakening is measured in the pause between reaction and response. It's in the moment you choose to soften rather than defend, to listen instead of lecture. There's a Buddhist saying, when you see someone acting out of anger or fear, remember, that is their pain speaking. Can you meet it with your love? And that's the test, isn't it? Not whether we can meditate for hours, but whether we can be a safe place for others to fall apart. Because anyone can repeat a mantra, but it takes real strength to sit beside someone's chaos. without needing to fix them, without needing them to be like you. That's compassion. That's growth. That's awakening in action. And maybe the most ironic thing is this: the more awakened we become, the less we feel the need to prove it. True spiritual maturity humbles you. It breaks you open, not to become more, but to become softer. So when you look in the mirror and ask yourself, how far have I come? Don't count the teachings you've memorized. Count the moments you chose love over pride, presence over performance, connection over control. Because at the end of this path, when all identities fall away and even your highest truths dissolve, only one thing will matter: did you love, and how fully? They don't tell you this at the start of the path. They don't mention that the most awakened beings you'll ever meet don't radiate superiority. They radiate service, not the kind of service that seeks recognition, not the kind that turns into performance, but the quiet kind, the sacred kind that flows naturally from an open heart. True enlightenment is not a crown you wear. It's not a pedestal you climb. It's a responsibility to carry the light and to use it, not to shine it on yourself, but to shine it into the darkness where others have forgotten their way. In nearly every wisdom tradition, from the bodhisattvas in Mahayana Buddhism to the teachings of Christ, the awakened ones don't ascend to escape the world. They stay, they serve, they become bridges. Wounds turned into medicine, suffering turned into empathy, silence turned into presence. You begin to realize all those moments of ego death, of shadow work, of sacred disillusionment. They weren't just about you. They were preparing you to become a vessel, to hold space for others, to listen deeply when no one else does, to offer words that heal without claiming the title of healer, to show up fully, not because it brings you glory, but because you remember what it felt like to be lost. Spiritual awakening, when fully integrated, is not a path that ends in personal perfection. It's a path that opens the heart so wide it becomes a home for others. Ram Dass once said, "We're all just walking each other home." That's the practice. You don't need robes. You don't need a platform. You don't need to be free of flaws. You need love. Service is not a role. It's a frequency. It's not about how much you give, but the quality of your presence when you give it. A simple act done with awareness can ripple farther than 1,000 words spoken from ego. When you look at someone and truly see them, when you sit in their sorrow without trying to fix it, when you meet them without judgment, without agenda, that is real spirituality in action. The irony? When you finally stop trying to be spiritual, when you stop chasing transcendence for your own sake, you begin to embody it, not because you've achieved some final state, but because you've become available to life, to love, to the suffering of others, and to the grace that flows when you meet it all with open hands. In the end, the question is not, how awake are you? The question is, who are you becoming for the world? And if the answer is someone who serves, not out of obligation, but out of reverence, then you've already touched the divine, and you've brought it here, where it matters most. Awakening is not a peak we climb, only to plant our flag and declare, "I've made it." It is not a final destination, not a mountaintop with clear skies and eternal clarity, not a finish line where the soul collapses in triumph. Instead, awakening is an unraveling, a spiral, a deepening, a shedding of layers you didn't even know you were wearing. Each time you believe you've arrived, life will gently or violently remind you there is more to see, more to feel, more to release. The mistake we often make is thinking that enlightenment is a one-time event, as if a single moment of stillness, a single download of insight, should be enough to carry us forever. But even the most profound epiphany is just a doorway, a glimpse, a single petal in the unfolding lotus of the soul. In Zen, there's a saying, before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. Because the essence of awakening is not what you know. It's how you show up to life again and again, with presence, with humility, with open hands. Even the Buddha continued his journey after his enlightenment under the Bodhi tree. He didn't disappear into the stars. He taught, he walked, he lived, because true awakening brings you back to the ground, to the body, to the breath, to the present moment where everything is unfolding. And yet, it's easy to fall back into the mind's trap of almost there, to chase a more expanded state, a higher frequency, a deeper meditation. But awakening is not something you chase. It's something you relax into. It's not above you. It's not beyond you. It's here, in the mess, in the stillness, in the heartbreak and the healing. The deepest awakening comes not in cosmic visions or otherworldly bliss, but in the sacred ordinary, doing the dishes with full presence, listening to a friend without needing to fix them, sitting with your own pain without needing to numb it. These are portals. These are the steps. This is the path. You are not awakening into something foreign. You are remembering something ancient, something always known, something buried beneath the noise. Each layer you peel back reveals another. Each truth you meet opens to a deeper one. And the more you awaken, the more you realize how much you still have to learn. That's the paradox. The ones who are truly awake never claim to be. They remain students, curious, quiet, present. Because awakening is not an identity. It is a rhythm, a return, again and again and again. You don't become someone new. You remember who you've always been. And that remembering never ends. You were never broken. Not really. The journey of awakening isn't about becoming someone better, someone more enlightened, someone purer or more spiritual. That illusion that we are not already whole is one of the first lies we are taught, and often the last one we let go of. From the beginning, everything you were looking for was already here. Not in the heavens, not in the stars, but in you, beneath the layers of trauma, beneath the masks of personality, beneath the shadow, the roles, the pain, and even beneath the quest itself. There was something untouched, unchanged, unshaken, the real you, the one that was never missing, the one that watched the chaos but was never consumed by it, the one that whispered in silence when the world grew loud, the one that felt like home but was buried under everything you thought you had to become. Awakening is not about adding more. It's about subtracting, peeling back, letting go. The ego wants to build a monument. It wants to prove it has awakened. It clings to ideas of progress, achievement, and status. But the truth is, the further you go, the quieter it gets. And the more you remember, the less there is to say. You don't need to transcend your humanity. You need to embrace it. You don't need to reject your pain. You need to feel it. You don't need to escape the world. You need to meet it with eyes that see clearly, with a heart that has been broken and yet remains open, with a soul that knows there is nothing left to prove. This journey, this spiral, is not a ladder to climb. It's a homecoming. You walked through fire, faced your demons, sat in silence when God felt far. You descended into shadow, lost your identity, grieved illusions, felt the sting of humility, and through it all, something deeper began to breathe. The breath of the self, the timeless you, the one who was watching even when you forgot. You don't arrive at awakening, you remember it. You don't reach the light, you reveal it. And the truth is, it was never really gone, just waiting for you to stop searching everywhere else. And finally, come home. If this message reached something deep inside you, don't let it stay silent. Let it echo. Share this with the one who's still searching, the one who thinks they're going crazy, but is actually waking up. Leave a comment below, not just to speak, but to remember. What part of you is finally seeing the truth? And if this path feels like home, if the stillness inside you is growing louder, subscribe now, because we're not just telling stories, we're remembering what the soul already knew. One video at a time, one truth at a time, one sacred step on the hidden voyage. Welcome home, Soul Whisper and Soul Creator. The hidden voyage